upload it later.
Yeah, I would do to the computer. We had issues with a presentation that we tried to record the other day that was saved to the cloud. So
I think we're recording, so no turning back.
Keep muting myself.
Should have background music.
You could sing for us.
Okay, Kathy is in. Penny, are you able to see her questions?
I am.
I'm able to see them too, so I don't know if the rest of you can as well, but
Yeah.
okay. People are starting to show up. We have 10 attendees.
You give people a few more minutes to hop on. We're up to 15 people. Well, should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I think so. We've got 17 attendees. Other people can join in if they
If they miss the welcome,
Yeah.
they'll catch up. So just like to welcome everyone to our NCIDQ roundtable discussion. We have a great turnout of attendees today for our fantastic panel of professionals to field your questions. I am Penny Johnston, your Vice President of Professional Development. Joining me today, we have our moderator, Laura Franz-Luber. She is our CIDQ ambassador and incoming president-elect for our Great Plains chapter. And then for our panelists, we have Cameron Stanek, Allie Smith, and Emma Halverson. All three have taken and passed the NCIDQ exam in the last 2 years. And with that, I will turn it over to Laura, who's going to start us off with a brief overview of the NCIDQ exam.
All right, thanks, Penny. I wanted to give just a few minutes as just a refresh on what the NCIDQ is, and some of the attendees today may be just learning about NCIDQ or what's all involved. So I wanted to make sure to review some of that with you before we get into all the questions. So what is, or why is the NCIDQ certification important? So for our profession, it is the industry standard. It is our credentials, it's our board exam, it's all those things. It distinguishes us from the crowd. So it tells people that we have the education, the experience, and have taken the exams to qualify ourselves. It separates us from those that are maybe more on the decorator side of things, or just maybe more hobbyists. And in several states, it is the professional licensure requirement for those states. In a lot of places, you know, to get promotion to a senior level, NCIDQ is something that they look forward to. And as far as long-term potential, it does increase your salary over time. So the exam is based on 3 different exams. So you have 2 multiple choice, the FX and the PX, as well as the practicum. The FX is designed more for just fundamentals. It's more focused on the book learning part of the curriculum, while that PX and the practicum is more based on your experience. The pass rate in the last year was about 60% for all 3 portions of the exam. So it is a tough exam, but if you prepare accordingly, it is passable. The FX, this is the blueprint of how the categories are broken up. And all this information is available on the CIDQ website. So I just wanted to give a brief overview, but please do a deeper dive when you're preparing for the exams. The FX is 100 questions that are graded and then 25 that are not graded. It's kind of pre-test questions. So it's a total of 125 questions. The PX is a similar format, but it's more about synthesizing the information, and it's more geared towards people who have had at least 2 years of experience. It's 150 questions and 25 additional ones that are not graded. And then the practicum is more of the applying of that information. There is no hand drafting, which it used to be back when I took it in 2013. Not software specific, so you don't need to be proficient in AutoCAD or Revit to do this. This is a separate software altogether. And each scenario will include a series of resource tabs. So you'll have codes to reference, you'll have lighting cut sheets to reference, door and hardware schedules, all of that. And this is how that's broken up. So you can see a lot of it is really dependent on the contract documents. The eligibility path and work experience. So this image is a little small on the screen, so I do encourage you to go check out the website for more detailed guidance on this, but you'll need approximately 3,500 hours of experience before you're able to sit for the FX and the practicum portion, or sorry, the PX and the practicum portion. And the quickest way to get this is to work under an NCIDQ certified designer. So if you have someone at your firm, or you can also look for a sponsor that you have in your network, or reach out to IIDA. We have a lot of professional members that would be willing to sponsor. Application requirements. So you'll have to submit transcripts to prove your education, as well as your work verification forms. That's your mentor or your advisor verifying that you have the hours. and there's fees associated as well. So some of the big deadlines coming up, July 31st is the deadline to apply for the fall exams this year. And the testing window is October 1st to November 24th this year, which is only this year due to COVID. There's different restrictions in the testing centers, so they have extended that window an additional 3 weeks. And every year it's in April and October. So those are the 2 opportunities you have. This isn't something you can do anytime. Here's some fees associated with it. So it really benefits you if you apply for all 3 at once. And the FX portion you are able to take out of school. So once you sit for that and pass that, you have about 5 years of a window to take the other 2 before you'd have to retake the fundamental exam. Scheduling, like I mentioned before, April and October, there are some fees if you reschedule the exam or if you happen to miss the exam. Studying for the exam, there's a lot of resources on the NCIDQ.org website, so exam blueprints. So that's really going to be the bulk of what you need to look for as far as specific content. We won't go over all of that in detail today, so please look at that. And there's a lot of other third-party resources too, including the Q Practice that you're able to get as a member of IIDA at a discounted rate. There's other examples of previous exams and quizzes that you'll want to look at, as well as these building codes will be really important too to study. And again, it's all on the website. This is an example of what your test result page will look like. So there was some good discussion earlier that looking at this is really going to highlight where you maybe need to study more for future exams. So if you're going to maybe take the fundamentals, even if it's earlier in that testing window, this will give you good feedback on what you maybe need to focus on as you finish. So certification, again, why does this matter? It really is a really strong way to advocate for our profession. The more NCIDQ certified designers we have in Iowa and Nebraska, the more momentum we'll have to passing our legislation efforts in Nebraska and pushing for permitting purposes in Iowa. Iowa already has a Title Act. So this is really, really important. And it really shows that you're dedicated to your profession, you have initiative, and it really will help promote you overall and be a better leader. This is a quick snapshot of the legislation and jurisdiction in the United States and Canada. So Iowa's a little bit ahead of us as far as a Title Act. Nebraska, we're pushing for a Practice Act. And then I mentioned earlier, COVID, they've extended the fall window to November 24th. So a few more weeks there. And make sure as you're going into testing this fall that you are aware of all the prometric testing requirements as far as COVID restrictions. And a big thing too I wanted to know is they do recommend sending any transcripts USPS with tracking. So they're not all in the office to accept FedEx and UPS deliveries. So it'd be really unfortunate if that was your holdup on getting approved to sit for the exam. So please send USPS tracking. All right, so now we'll get into the meat of the presentation, I guess, and we'll start asking some questions to our panelists here. So taking off the presentation mode, so you'll be able to see all of our faces. And please, if you have questions, use the Q&A box. We are fielding questions. Penny's helping us do that. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. We want to make sure we're answering what is beneficial for you guys. So we'll start by doing introductions and learning when everyone took their exams. So Emma, we'll start with you. Where do you work? What university did you attend? And when did you become NCIDQ certified?
Sure. Hi, I'm Emma Halverson. I work at DLR Group. I've been there for the past 3.5 years. I took the NCIDQ exams last April and passed in April. And I went to school at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I graduated in 2012.
Awesome. Cameron? Oh, you're muted, Cameron.
Hi, I'm Cameron Stanek. I work at Newman Munson Architects for 5 years. I passed my NCIDQ in 2018, but I didn't take it all at one single time. I took it one test at a time, so we'll talk more about that later. And I think that's it, right?
Where did you go to school?
Iowa State University.
Iowa State. Allie, how about you?
Hi, I'm Allie Smith. I work at DLR Group with Emma, and I've been there for 3 years. I went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I graduated in 2017, and then I took all 3 tests last April and also became certified then. So.
Awesome. So we have a couple that have taken them all at once, and then one that spread them out a little bit too. So if you have specific questions geared towards that, feel free to ask those as well. So we'll start in by kind of talking about more of the prep for the exams. So Emma, what resources did you use for studying?
I was a big fan of Q Practice. I did all of their lessons that they had planned out, and I did their practice tests and their quizzes over and over and over again. And then I used the book a lot too. I know that one's not everyone uses the book, but I used the book and I ended up reading it all the way through once. And then I went through again with note cards. And then as I took the test and kind of saw which areas I needed more work, I would go through and reread those sections. So it was a lot of repetitive studying, rereading, and memorizing for me.
You're talking about the Ballast book, right?
Yes.
Kind of the Bible for NCIDQ. So the CIDQ will give you a long list of different books and everything, but the Ballast book is really the Bible, the core of what the curriculum is based on.
Yeah, we ended up, Allie and I studied together. We ended up buying another book, and we, I think, used it for like a day or two and never opened it again. So I would just say the Ballast book is the one.
And then Cameron, did you use the Q Practice as well?
I did. I went to the in-person class, so it was a little bit different than just the online format, but there were quizzes and things online that I definitely utilized and was thankful. I guess I'm a little unfamiliar if you have to pay and how that system works at this moment currently, but at the time we paid for certain quizzes and things like that. And I thought it was definitely worth it, especially after taking the test. I realized like how similar the formatting was and things like that. The Ballast book, I agree, is definitely something you want to use. But other than that, I think I utilized flashcards that previous interior designers had used.
Yeah, in addition to Q Practice, we also purchased the practice exams on the NCIDQ website, and we use those. Those are more in tune to exactly what the exam is going to be like, whereas Q Practice is great and it's great practice, but it is slightly different than the exact wording and verbiage of the actual test. So it was good to get a mixture of both.
If you get the resources from CIDQ specifically, it is like old test questions, so you can really get a sense of how they maybe twist it to make it a little tougher of a question. That's always really good to understand how they're going to do that. Allie, when did you start studying, or how many months before your exam did you start to study?
I started studying in early January for the April exam. So I studied all the way through April, and I spaced out the tests accordingly, like one at the beginning of the month, middle, and end. And I thought that that was plenty of time, but it was a lot of studying. But yeah.
Yeah, I should mention too that you have a full month to take the test, but you can schedule when you take them. So maybe you want to take the FX at the beginning of the month, so then you still have a few more weeks to study for the other portion. You're able to do that and kind of make that testing fit your strengths. What was your typical studying schedule like? Allie, we'll start with you.
I would study almost every single day. So after work, I would take like a little break, and then I would probably start studying at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and then until bed. And then on the weekends, we would study. Like Emma and I would usually meet up like once a week, and we would study together. But I did study a lot. That's all I did for those 3 months.
So Emma, you probably studied in a similar fashion as Allie.
Yeah, but like toned down a little bit. I probably studied, I think each night I read a chapter and I did a practice quiz. But I also took time to step away from it for a bit to kind of let it all digest. But then on the weekends was when I would sit down at my kitchen table and really sit down and go through flashcards and read and dive in, so that it was a longer span for me. So throughout, yeah, but a little bit less than Allie.
Cameron, what about you?
Probably a similar approach to Emma. I would say I like gave more time to it on the weekend. But as it got closer, I definitely obviously allocated more time each night. And then I think it was kind of important just to make sure that I knew what I understood versus what I had memorized. And I think that was kind of a big thing, like legitimately testing myself, like, could I answer that question, or was it just something that I was reading and understanding? And so then I focused on that. So I think it just depended on especially which test I was studying for.
Yeah, it's not just memorization. You have to kind of understand it too and apply it. Did you use any study groups, Cameron? You're in Eastern Iowa, for those that might not know.
Yeah, I'm in Iowa City right now, actually. I did not. Most everyone that took the test was somewhere else. And so I think now that we are using Zoom so much more often, it's probably going to be easier, hopefully, for everyone taking it now, because we're more familiar with this format. I think it would have been nice to study with someone else, but at the end of the day, like, it's up to you and how you work.
Mm-hmm. Allie, were there any ways, looking back, that you would have changed the way you studied?
I think one of the main things that I wish I hadn't done was the first time that I read the book through, I read it through once and then I read it through again to like really dive into what I needed to relook at. But I was making note cards as I was going through the book itself. And I feel like I wish I would have just made notes instead of the note cards, because I never really utilized those specific note cards. I did use the note cards, like when I would get test answers wrong, I would create a note card for those so that I could go back through, and I would just like go through the note cards and keep on doing them until I got them all right. So
yeah, I was a highlighter, so when I read the book through all the way, I highlighted as I went, and then those were the things I went back and reread. That was my kind of strategy. But I'm also a flashcard person too, so that helped test my memory on a lot of it. And I used a Quizlet app. I don't know if that's still out there or not, but
yeah, I think it is. I think we looked at using that, but I'm more of a I like flashcards, but I also like the process of writing the question down. I think I retain it better when I write it myself.
We have our first question that came in from our attendees. They'd like to know, where is the best place to go to get the books? Does IIDA offer the books, or do you need to get them through the CIDQ website?
I think they're available. They'll give you a list of ones to use on CIDQ, but the Ballast book, even if you just kind of Google it, NCIDQ Ballast, BALLAST, I got mine on Amazon. Or I would also reach out to maybe other people who have maybe taken it recently and see if you can borrow their book, because it does get expensive by the time you start to, do the different tests and the test itself. So yeah, I think it's really,
I would say,
anywhere.
And use your resources for sure. Ask around, because even if they do a new volume, it might be like minimal changes. So keep that in mind. I know for our DLR, we have others in the company that have taken it, so we have like a PDF that we would print off I don't know if that's allowed, so I'm sorry if not, but that's how we did.
I was gonna say, reach out to your employers and your firms and stuff too. Granted, there's gonna be someone who's taking it, I'm sure, unless you're in a very, very small firm, but reach out to some of those.
Laura, maybe you can ask this question. People like to know if there's going to be an updated NCIDQ reference book for the updated exam.
That I do not know, but
Yeah.
I can look into that and see. I'll make a little note here. So Cameron, were there any tricks that you used to memorize the codes? So the codes are a big portion of this exam, knowing, you know, NFPA, this, ASTM 84, that kind of stuff. Were there any ways that you memorized those?
That's definitely, I think that's one of the hardest parts of it, at least for me, especially knowing, and you know, you can look it up, like you can grab a book if you're not taking the test. I think it was when you use association with like words and letters and things like that, I kind of just made up some weird associations on it. Nothing that I can recall at the moment, but you know, like if it was fire and then like NFPA, you know, like you just kind of do those associations. I don't think I have a strong answer for that, but that's what I did.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a lot of just coming up with those weird sayings that help you memorize things.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is where I really did utilize the flashcards, and I would suggest making those like one of the first things that you do, and then continually throughout the 3 months, just like reviewing those flashcards at least like a few times a week. And I found that as I started getting into like all of the practice quizzes and practice tests, that I kind of started to realize that I was like actually knowing them, and it wasn't just memorizing them at that point.
Yeah. Allie definitely had some good acronyms that she would come to work and she'd be like, look what I just thought of. And then it would stick in my brain too. So I would say Allie was really helpful for those parts.
Or a little sing song, you know, whatever it takes, honestly, to remember that stuff is whatever works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll transition a little bit more into the experience you guys had taking the exams. So Emma, do you want to talk a little bit about the FX exam? If you have any.
Yes, that was the first one. And for me, that one was the hardest exam. And I don't think many people would say that, but I think it was because I'm so far removed from college and from school. And so I think the FX was really, like Laura said, fundamentals. So it's really what you learn in school, like design fundamentals, color fundamentals. And I was just like, it was hard for me to remember all of those things.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, why you can take it right out of school, because I think that's when the information's really fresh in your mind. But again, if you study and get it all down, it's passable, but it was definitely probably the hardest one for me just because I was a lot removed, more removed than like Allie was, for instance.
Yeah. Cameron, how was the FX, the IDFX, or PX, sorry. I keep mixing those up. You're still muted, sorry.
Sorry. For me, that was my hardest. I would say it is definitely good for somebody to take the FX right after school, just like Emma said, but the PX, it's something that you'll be using throughout work. So I think like elements where it was more about like project coordination and sequences and things like that. Sometimes my my natural instinct of like order or how to handle a client, like that kind of stuff, I kind of had to recheck that, because even if it makes sense or it feels like it's something that you're doing like for the client, at the end of the day, it might not be the best option for the business side of things. So I think for me, that was something that made a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's a really good reminder to remember this is about basic competency. It's not necessarily what you would do design specific wise. It's very much just right or wrong, black or white. It's not so much, they're not judging you on aesthetics or things like that. So it's sometimes hard to, yeah, draw on your work experience to some extent, but also remember what they're looking for when they're testing. Allie, how was the practicum portion for you?
So the practicum portion was the part where you're applying everything that you've kind of been studying, and you do have the codes. They do give you those, but they are on the screen, and the screen is kind of hard to have multiple windows open at once. So, and also this is the test where you were really kind of scrambling for time, or at least I know that a lot of people are. So knowing those codes and knowing like, oh, the corridor needs to be X feet wide, and not having to look those up saves you a lot of time. And it's broken into 3 sections of a residential case study, a small commercial, and a large commercial. And once you like end one of those, like get out of that case study, you can't go back to it. And so you really have to be good about time managing during this test. And they give, at the beginning of the exam, they say you should allocate X amount of minutes to each portion, but you can like spend that time however you want. But like mine, the first one was the residential one, and I ended up spending too long on that one because I've never done residential design. And so I was getting really tripped up on that. And then it made all my other portions shorter because I had spent more time on there.
Did you think the instructions were easy to follow as part of the practicum portion?
I think they were easy to follow. It was just more the program itself was hard to maneuver, like I had said. And I think using the practice test that the CIDQ has on their website was a really good way to learn how their system works. But just note that if you do that, they don't give you which answers you did incorrectly. They don't tell you which ones.
And then do you have unlimited, can you take that test unlimited times, or do you have to pay for each time?
You have to pay for each time. So what Emma and I ended up doing was we did the Q practice, they had like a 4-hour, or I don't know if it was 4 hours, but they had a presentation where they went through every single question. So we ended up doing that so we could figure out which ones we had gotten wrong.
Emma, I know you said that the PX or the FX was the hardest of the 3 exams, but what was maybe the other challenging parts of the exams? Any of them?
I would say it was hard as relative, I guess. I mean, it was just, it was challenging for me because a hard part I found was taking myself, Cameron kind of talked about this, like taking myself out of how I work in a day-to-day life and my work scenario, and putting myself into the shoes of the reviewer and what the answer should be from a right or wrong standpoint. So I think that's one big thing. And then Allie kind of talked a little bit about timing. The timing was a real tricky one. I know Allie and I were in like a Facebook group, and there were some people that had a really, really hard time with the timing, that didn't even maybe make it through half of the test. So it's really important to understand that there is a clock. You should go through the questions. If there's a question that you're not super sure about, write it down, give it a good guess, move on, and come back to it if you have a chance. And then one thing I think really helped as I went through, so I did FX and then PX and then PAC. And then after the FX and the PX, you get the document that tells you, you know, which areas you were proficient in, which areas you were maybe not, and what your final score was. So understanding those areas and understanding the percentage of their importance in your final score, I think was really helpful too. So that like when I was taking the practicum, I knew 40% of the test was construction documents. So I cared a little bit more about those questions. And if I knew it was one that was maybe 25% and I didn't know the answer, I gave it like my best shot and I kept going and I didn't stress on it. So I think that was a big thing, just keeping your calm as you're going through, watching the clock, but knowing that there's still questions to come, and there might be a question, 4 questions towards the end that you know absolutely for sure. And so I'd rather get to that question. I'd rather answer that one correctly than spend too much time on this one that I'm not super confident on.
So Emma, we have a question for you. Do you feel like the Q practice tests were a good representation of the actual exam? Did those really help prepare you?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember some of the questions on the actual exam that I would be like, they asked that almost exactly on Q practice. So there would be some questions, they might be like worded slightly different, but they were very similar in style and content.
I agree with that. And for the practicum Q practice test, like in particular though, on Q practice, you would get done with a test and you would have gotten one answer right. And then when they would show you like the correct answer, it was because you had an item not rotated the right way or slightly out of the box that they had set. And that's not how the practicum actually is. So don't let the results of the Q practice make you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to fail this test. Because as long as you're like know the information and you're getting it like close to the correct answer that Q practice is giving you, then you're going to be okay.
Cameron, thinking back to how you studied and taking the exams, were there anything that you would have done differently to prepare yourself?
The fact that I had taken each one separately, I think it was one way because I was like, I know I want to start taking this, and if even if I feel like I have a lot on my plate, like I'll just at least get one done. I think that was good for what was happening at that particular moment of time, and then I combined the others. But I think like after studying all of that time and then taking the test and then studying it again and then taking a test, it certainly would have been faster to take them all at the same time. But I don't know if I would have passed them all at the same time. I mean, you'd hope, but I don't know. I just wanted to mention really quick on the multiple choice questions. I'm someone that questions myself, but they always say go with your first instinct. But so they do have an option for you to like mark a question along while you're going along. So that could also help with time management. So at least you know to come back to it if you can. Just a side note.
I agree with that statement. On the PX and the FX, I feel like time really wasn't an issue. And I guess you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that portion, but I feel like I got done like in half the time for those. But they always say make sure to mark an answer before you move on to the next question. And like Cameron said, they do have that button where you can mark it if you think you need to come back to it. And there might be like a question that comes later that you're like, oh, that helps me answer that question that I had guessed on. But definitely just start to really make yourself go with your gut instinct, because when you go back and change them, I noticed when I was doing the practice test, any question that I would change, I would get wrong because I started to.
A lot of times you can always get it down to 2, but then sometimes it's those last 2 that you're going back and forth on.
Mm-hmm. And you do get scratch paper as well, so you can write down like question 48 and then write a little note to yourself too.
That's a good trick. How would you say the tests overlapped? Allie or Emma, who took them all at once? As far as the content.
I think it overlapped enough so that I was appreciative that I took them all at once. There were questions of similar content on them. They were just maybe asked differently and asked, like I said, one from the fundamental standpoint and then one from like, how would you apply it standpoint. So you would study all of that information at once and then just answer the questions differently. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say like you can kind of start to see when you compare all of the blueprints next to each other, what information and what type of content is being overlapped between the tests. And I would say that for, like, I think for the PX is where you actually do need to like memorize some of the codes and like the NFPA stuff, whereas on the practicum, you have those to like reference.
Mm-hmm.
So
the book also does spell it out in the table of contents, each chapter and which test that chapter would be associated with. So if you spread them out, it helps you like understand which chapters to focus on. But like Ellie said, there were certain chapters that would have like a star for one test and then like an X for the other. So it would be for both.
mm-hmm.
We have another question that just came in, and maybe Cameron, you can answer this one. Do you also get a calculator, either a physical one or a computer one?
From what I remember, you get both. I also remember that the math didn't seem like crazily hard. Like I could have done it in my head or by hand or whatever. But when you're nervous, even sometimes it's good to have the calculator. So yeah, you do definitely get one.
Were there a lot of those questions on the exams as far as the multiple choice?
Yeah, I don't think so.
You get a physical calculator, at least at the place I was at, for the FX and the PX, but for the practicum, which is when you probably really want a physical calculator, you had to use the computer screen one, which was, I don't know if that's for every single one, but yeah, I was super nervous about all the calculations too, and I think there ended up being like one, maybe two, and it wasn't one of the super tricky ones.
I think mine, if I remember back, was about wall covering and yardage.
Yeah. The wall covering one, I just ended up being like, I'm just gonna not get this one right, and they keep saying else. And there was only one question about it, so it was
like, I think this is pretty close. I don't remember if I got it right or not, but it's been too long. But
yeah.
So this can, I'll open this up to any of you guys. How did you handle the nerves and stress on testing day or the day before? I think I remember the day before, like I stopped studying at some point. I was like, I'm not going to learn something in the next 12 hours that I didn't know already. So like just kind of trusting that you know what you're going to know going into it.
Yeah, I think I took like a couple of note cards with me, but then it got to the point where I was just like, let's just do this.
Usually I'm that person that's like cramming right before the test, but I actually did not do that. On the day of, I wouldn't look at anything besides like, I would have like maybe like 3 little notes that I would be like, okay, this is the thing I always forget. I need to remember this. And then I would look at that and then go in.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I'm definitely someone that gets nervous. So I think like even just knowing what I had to have, because you know they'll like frisk you and like the testing that I saw, so like, but it's like okay, it's fine. And knowing like what I could and couldn't have, instead of like, because if someone says you can't do this, you just feel like already that anxiety goes up. So I think being prepped for that. And then also like realizing the importance of sleep, because that's how you like retain the information, I think was kind of a huge deal. And just knowing that, okay, I'm going to take this. It's whether I pass it or fail it, it's the way it is. And you just got to like do it. So.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about the why. So Cameron, you can start. Why did you decide to become NCIDQ certified?
Going to school at Iowa State, CETA accredited program, meant a lot to me because I know that there's a difference between decorators and designers, and most of the world still doesn't quite know that, and even certain architecture firms and people that we work with don't quite understand it. So I think like elevating the profession, and you'll hear that a lot, I think, from everyone, but it's, you work so hard and you get that degree and you practice things and you're doing a lot more than what people think you're doing. I think like taking this test, just having those letters by my name and just being able to explain it to other people, but also like being someone that works in an architecture firm, I really wanted to make sure that I was holding myself accountable and just like being able to understand what they were expecting me to know.
Mm-hmm. Allie, how about you?
So I went to UNL, which is also a CETA accredited school, and it was kind of just always taught to us that, hey, like once you graduate, you should take the NCIDQ, like this is the next step in your career. And then at DLR Group, they were really supportive, and they really want all of their employees to better themselves and develop further. So that's why I ended up doing it.
Emma, do you have any other words to add?
They nailed it.
Yeah.
I would say it was also, I'm always kind of like striving for that next thing. And it was just the next thing in my career. And I knew I wanted to advance within DLR Group. And we kind of touched on it in the beginning. Leadership kind of looks at employees and how they're working to better themselves. And so I wanted to take advantage of that. And I wanted those letters after my name on my business card.
Yeah, it's a good, not only, professional step, but a big, I think, personal goal as well. I think kind of what's next after school, what's that next step?
Yeah. I would say also another reason, I'm in a sector in our company where I'm the only designer. And so I knew that my name was getting put on a lot of proposals and RFPs and whatnot. And so I thought it was important as the interior designer, the representation, to make sure that I was representing the discipline correctly and doing the work that I needed to do.
And I think we're really pushing towards advocacy, and hopefully one day we do have permitting privileges, and it looks like NCIDQ is going to be that exam that gives us that accreditation for that. So look for that too for the future, that hopefully it's within our short time frame here, but look at that too as a professional goal. And I know my firm at HDR, to be in a senior level, they look at those credentials as a requirement to become a senior level person. And some government projects, you have to be NCIDQ certified. There's different benchmarks and things too. So it really puts us at that playing field with other, professional engineers or AIA, all of that. Any advice? Well, I think we kind of talked about the advice, I think, for people who want to take it. We're probably all do it. It's tough. It's a hard few months of studying, but I know it's like, I learned a lot when I was studying, stuff that you don't necessarily learn in school. That was really important, I think, when you started to learn. So it just makes you a better designer as well. If there's any other questions, feel free to pop them in now. Let's see. Has passing the NCIDQ positively impacted your career? Have you seen any big changes since you took the NCIDQ? Anyone can answer that one.
I think it was Cameron that said it just kind of makes you more credible and kind of puts you on that same level as the architecture people. And it just kind of just knowing all of the information that you do learn, maybe you don't, like, because you get quizzed on the electrical and the structural items, but you aren't going into the specifics of those. But you still, now I know when to raise red flags or when I can like question things. So it just made me more knowledgeable and really helps me with designing with all the other disciplines.
It kind of gives you a little bit more of a backbone, a little more confidence at the table to be like, kind of
like, I don't think you have to do it that way.
Yeah. I see a question in the chat from Abby. She's watching. She asked about my role as an ambassador. So being NCIDQ certified, anyone can become an ambassador. We're a resource for people if they have questions about the exam, maybe if they need a sponsor or to get in touch with someone so they could have that mentor to verify their hours. So really just here as a resource to anyone. So I will put up a slide here in a little bit too with my email address if anyone has questions separate from this, or if they thought of something after the fact. I'm always here to answer those questions. We have another one too. What were some of the questions that stuck out the most from any of you from the test? What are maybe the ones that are like, oh, I should have known that, or why they asked that, or that kind of thing?
There was one, and it was a few years ago, but a couple years ago that I took it. But I remember like with some of the structural or like basically like the systems, and you think you understand it, and when you see the visual, it makes sense. But then when there's multiple choice and you see 4 of them lined up, like maybe you know one is going to deck and one isn't, you're like, so you can determine that. But like sometimes those smaller differences, I think, were things that I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention to, because like I said, when you see something next to each other, you can kind of make an argument for both.
Mm-hmm.
That's one that sticks out most.
Mine was the wall covering one. 7 years later, and I still remember that wall covering one. But
I think mine was also maybe the wall covering one, just because I flat out was like, that's just not for me.
Or drapery. Yeah, someone mentioned drapery. That was
the drapery.
Yeah.
Those are just things that you just don't really do in commercial world. So I don't know.
And I think we had talked about this earlier before the thing today, but you have to remember also that on the FX and the PX, they do have throwaway questions that they put in there. And after like I saw like 5 or 6 electrical questions on one of the tests, I'm like, okay, these ones have to be the throwaway, because I know that only X amount of questions are supposed to be about like this specific topic. So then it kind of like took off the stress of, oh my gosh, I didn't know that answer. You can kind of start to guess which ones are the throwaway questions.
And I think one of the tricks I used, I think when it came to time management for the multiple choice part, was I knew roughly about how many minutes I could do per question. So if I sat there and like, okay, I'm into minute 4 on this one, like I got to move on. So trying to understand how many you really have per question, because there's going to be some where you know automatically. That kind of helped me judge mine too.
Yeah.
We had some specific questions come in before this. Is the codes reference document they provide available for reference on all the exams? We kind of touched on this earlier.
Only on the practicum.
And then do you need to memorize the charts for calculating restroom fixtures and occupancy loads, or are they available for reference?
Those were also available on the practicum, but not the other ones. And I don't recall there being questions about that on the other tests.
I feel like I do remember it on the practicum, and that was one of them that was taking me way too long to like answer. So then that was one of the ones that I flagged. And actually the one question that I do remember standing out now was about the door hardware. It was a super long question on the practicum. And that was one that after like a couple minutes, I was like, I'm going to guess on this one and come back to it at the end.
So I'll take this opportunity to share my screen again to talk about a few things that IIDA does for the test, and then we'll wrap up with any other questions. Penny can jump in for other questions. So 1 second here. So let me come back to here. So I can talk about this a little bit. NCIDQ, IIDA does offer an NCIDQ tuition reimbursement fund. So this is something that once you pass all of your exams, you can apply to get this reimbursement up to $1,100. And I would also encourage all of you to see what your policies are at your firms. Some firms reimburse the total amount, some don't. Some give you a bonus. It really just depends. So I would make sure that you ask those questions when you start to look into doing the exam. And that way they kind of know that you're, you know, applying and studying to take this exam and forward your career. And Penny, you can for the Q practice.
So just a reminder, our next Q practice team access session begins July 1st for the fall exam, and that is 3 months of access to the comparable premium plan that you would purchase on your own. And this is available to our IIDA members only. The cost is $315 compared to $447 if you were to do it on your own. So if you're interested in signing up for that, we need you to sign up ideally prior to July 1st, so you can get the full 3 months of access for your money. And then just another plug for our Design Discovery Fund. Applications are now open for that fund. We award up to $3,500 per year to IIDM members. Those applications are open through July 27th.
And I'll chime in here. So please remember to visit, it's a little confusing, but it's CIDQ.org. It's just the council. It's your one-stop shop for all your NCIDQ needs. So that's where you're going to see a lot of the blueprint information, a lot of the references to look at. The upcoming deadline for the fall exams is July 31st, so you have a little over a month for that. And remember to send in your stuff via USPS with tracking so they're able to receive it. And the fall exam testing window is extended to November 24th. And make sure to check with Prometric and kind of bookmark your time as early as you know when you want to take it, because I do kind of just assume that those are going to be filled up pretty fast because that's where a lot of people take their board exams and different tests. I also dropped in my email here at the bottom too. If you have any more questions, feel free to email me at laura.franzlubers@hdrinc.com. And I can answer more questions for you that way. And I'm kind of circling back to one note that we talked about when we were prepping for this, is that if you walk out of your test and you feel like you failed, that is not always a bad sign, because I definitely felt like I was going to fail. I think, Allie, you said you felt that way as well, leaving the testing site.
Yes, luckily for the FX and the PX, you get your answers like within 10 or 20 minutes at max. For the practicum though, I thought that I failed 100%, and then I ended up passing, and it wasn't my worst score. So yeah,
that's a good thing to note. I didn't cover that earlier, but you do get your results quickly for those multiple choice. The practicum is still 6 to 8 weeks or so.
You don't get, just to clarify, you don't get your answers, you just get your result, and then you get your, they break it down by section and tell you like how good you did in each section, but not necessarily which ones you got wrong.
And I guess it's also good to note that those are the preliminary scores, so there is a potential that they would end up changing, but a majority of people's don't, from what I've heard, and mine didn't.
I'll briefly show you our sponsors, and then I'll stop sharing, and we'll do any last minute questions for the last few minutes. But we do want to thank all of our sponsors for allowing us to do more presentations like this virtually for people, as well as just all of our content, as well as they help us offer the Q practice to our members. So thank you to all of our wonderful sponsors here. Penny, can you chime in if there's any additional questions you've seen come in?
We have not seen any more come in, but somebody did post a reminder that if you were registered for the April exams, CIDQ will give you a free test exam for each one you've registered for if you take it in October. So that's a good reminder.
It looks like someone wrote in the chat too that her architecture firm was super supportive in her taking this next step, no matter what point you are in your career. she's going to be studying, so that's great. How would you organize your study plan based on having 9 months of study? Do any of you have recommendations?
I would use the time to get familiar with the book. I don't think I would dive like super into specific questions or practice quizzes, just because I think that could get overwhelming and pretty intense. But I think if you have 9 months, it doesn't hurt to get familiar with the book and the content in the book and reading it through, and then maybe read it through a second time and highlight your the things you find important.
I
Just
think
a bit of light
too,
reading.
I think I studied within a few months too, but I think it was a very intense 3 to 4 months. So I think if you have, 9 months, you might be able to do it in a more intentional, slower process. We've got 3 more minutes left. Any other final words or suggestions?
I would say take it as soon as you can if you're out of school, if you just got out of school, because you're kind of more in that mode of studying. More of the information is a little bit more fresh, so it might almost be reminders. But if you're not, that's totally fine, and that's awesome. You probably have a lot more field-based knowledge that is beneficial to you rather than people that are taking it fresh out of school. So I think there's benefits to both. So don't sell yourself short regardless of which position you're taking it in. And I'm really happy that you're all thinking about taking it. So don't chicken out, and hopefully we didn't scare you.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And something that I remember when I was planning on taking it that spring, and then all of a sudden, like, I was put on these 2 huge big projects, and then I started to like get a little freaked out, and I was like, I don't think I can do this and manage work at the same time. And then my like boss had told me that there's never going to be a good time.
exactly. Yeah.
So I ended up just taking it then, just forced myself to, signed up and just paid for the exam so that I wouldn't back out.
Yeah.
I was planning a wedding when I was studying for mine, so there's never a great time.
Yeah. And Kathy also mentioned too that if you're interested in getting connected with other people who are studying, no matter what city center you're in, Cameron mentioned we could do more Zoom calls with study groups. So please message professionaldevelopment@iida-gp.org, and she can help create a list of who's studying when they're taking it, so you can really study together and use that benefit. So with that, we'll close this out. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to share your experiences and help, I guess, the next generation of NCIDQ exam takers. Thank you very much. And thanks for attending, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.